What's up, YouTube? It is Wednesday, January 2nd of the new year, 2013. You'll have to excuse me if I sound a little funny. I've been fighting off a cold, and I think I'm starting to lose the battle. So, um, this week, our topic is a little bit of kind of the differences between, someone who's um, API and trans, um, our experience and how that differs to somebody who is not API but is trans. So, really, I feel like the first thing, or I guess a little background too about me, is um, I guess you would consider me fourth generation Japanese American, but um, this is where it gets a little confusing. Is my parents are third generation, born here in the States. My grandparents were born here in the States as well, and my brother and I were actually adopted from Japan. So it's a little confusing because since we weren't born here, but I kind of consider myself fourth generation based on the family I was adopted into. So that's a little bit kind of, it gets a little gets a little confusing for me. Um, so I feel like the biggest thing that comes to my mind when it comes to comparing and um, more contrasting, I guess, the difference in my experience to some of my trans friends that are not API, um, is kind of this general sense of acceptance within the community. Um, I know that, obviously here's this channel of folks who are trans and API. But I feel like as a whole, API community is not as accepting of um, trans folks, and I mean LGBT folks in general, but specifically since this is a trans channel about trans folks. So I feel like it's something that's really not talked about. There isn't a lot of education still within the API community, and that leads to obviously there being some disconnect between trans API people and the API community. And I feel like there is a little bit more, though there's still a long way to go, of acceptance within the non-API communities. Specifically, I think people of color in general have a little bit of a harder time with finding acceptance in their community, and being trans. I think most of my friends that are white and trans, and this isn't necessarily a reflection of their direct immediate family, but of the community of white people as a whole, there tends to be a little bit more of acceptance. And I notice this most when I go to things like pride events or conferences. There tends to be an overwhelmingly large number of white people. And then there's, like, obviously minorities in there or people of color in there, but it's definitely not as large as in comparison to the white people that go to the conferences I go to. So um, that alone kind of says to me that there's a little bit of a disconnect in how our communities see us, or even acknowledge our really existence in a way. um, I think the other big thing for me that I noticed, is the willingness, um, kind of to even hear about the trans experience. So I feel like there's an effort in my being trans and wanting to share that with people in my community, but there is not a it's not really reciprocated. Like my community doesn't really want to hear about my experience. um, Whereas I go to a lot of events and there's a lot of people that are, you know trans that are speaking with me, maybe on a panel or something, and people are very, they respond very differently, I think, to somebody who's not API. There's a little bit of, I think, stereotypes that go into being someone who is Asian, and kind of that model minority mentality of having pretty much that perfect life. Like, you know, went to school, has a good job, is straight, all those kind of things. No tattoos, things like that. And I feel like, you know, there's a lot of resistance in accepting anything but that kind of ideal. And I feel like that kind of ties into my trans experience because I obviously am not the model minority in what people think of as a perfect Asian. And it affects, I think, how people then respond to my identity as being trans. Um, it's like funny is I'll go to a conference or something and there's maybe 2,000 people at this conference. And I'll run into somebody else who's trans at usually a trans workshop. And their API. And this has happened to me probably like 3 or 4 times where they're like, I've never met another trans person who's Asian. And I feel like, wow, I don't think I have either. And I still have only met a handful. I can count them right now. People I've met in person, like on one hand. After I go to this next conference at the end of this month, I think I'll be able to add a couple more because I think a couple people from this channel are going, so that'll be really cool. And I look forward to it. But there is definitely a lot of assumptions about how my transition works, or how it would be so different from somebody who's not API because of the shame and because of the like honoring my family that people associate with being Asian that also reflects on my trans identity. I feel like I'm rambling and I've taken cold medicine, so I could replay this next week and realize I've ranted for 7 minutes about absolutely nothing that I'm supposed to. But really, I feel like people assumed because I'm Asian too that my transition has to somehow be totally different. And in some ways it has been because of how I've had to navigate coming out or choosing to come out in certain situations when I'm at like an Asian event, and trying not to, you know, I think make my trans identity louder than my Asian identity, and I have a lot of conflicts with that sometimes. So I think I may stop there, and I apologize if this is just absolutely something you can't follow. But a happy new year, and I hope everybody had a very safe and you know fun new year. And I will look forward to doing the next video, and hopefully I'll be in a little bit of a clearer headspace. All right, talk to y'all soon.